Seafood Congress 2015 is sponsored by Seafish.
Hello and welcome to the second of three major live programmes looking at the World Seafood Congress, coming to you live from the heart of Grimsby at the Grimsby Institute's University Centre. The event is biannual and the venue this year is here at the premier fish processing town of the UK in Grimsby. Joining me in the studio tonight to discuss the day's goings-on, we have Timothy Hanson of the IAFI, who inspect fish. We also have Chris Leftwich from the same organisation, and we have Mike Mitchell from Young's. Good evening to all of you. Good evening.
Good evening.
So yesterday was the first big day of the World Seafood Congress, but it didn't stop when the Grimsby Institute emptied. Many of the delegates went on to the Humber Royal Hotel, where we caught up with Elaine Hayes, the chair of Seafish.
Yes, it's been a very interesting day. Many of the speakers today have been talking about how we need to be more efficient in the industry, and in particular how every time we take a fish out of the sea, we actually need to use all of that fish, and there are opportunities to do that, and in particular to look at how we feed what is quite now a quite crowded planet. I think it's because in any industry you can always do better, and so what we want to make sure is that our industry is fit for the next century. So we talk about the skills that we have, the skills that can be transferred, and what skills we're going to need into the future. Trade is always important. This country, as any country, thrives on its economy. The economies of many of these countries are slower than ours. Ours indeed is still only stuttering into life, and what we really want to do is be able to say, let's talk to each other about how we can trade successfully and grow our economies and grow the seafood industry. Grimsby is obviously the seafood capital of England, without doubt, and I'm delighted to be back here. I come here regularly, and I'm really looking forward to this evening's event where we're going to showcase lots of seafood and local products to an international audience. I'm really looking forward to hearing some more of the discussions that have been about how we can wrap ethical issues into the seafood industry and making sure that we're really setting the very highest standards. There have been some issues in the industry and beyond, and we're really concerned about those, and I think that will probably be the most important thing that we do this week.
Now, joining me in the studio, we have Tim, Chris and Mike. And I'm going to start with you, Tim, because obviously what we've seen more recently is we've seen some really interesting changes, particularly in trade between Europe and the US. So how do you see this affecting the seafood industry?
Well, the biggest trade that comes from the United States and to the EU is, in terms of value, is lobsters. And they're shipped here live. Shipped here every day, and Europe consumes quite a few of them, of course. The traditional second biggest commodity would be pollock, followed by salmon, and possibly scallops thereafter, and some lesser commodities. The UK, I believe, is third in consumption of U.S. products among the 28 European member states. Germany's number one and France is number two. And yeah, I think the total for EU, and I don't know the breakdown by country now, but it's about 5.9 billion US dollars.
I know obviously in the UK, particularly wild Alaskan salmon, it's almost seen as almost kind of the best salmon you can get. And is that sort of a message which you really want to push out to people, or would you rather that they were, buying more homegrown in Scotland?
Well, I'm pretty partial to Alaska salmon, particularly Chinook salmon and coho salmon. When you get it, it's very high quality and very special. It's probably is in a different market niche than the farm-raised salmon. It's more of a specialty item because there's only so much of it. But I would highly recommend those commodities. But I tell you, I eat a lot of farm-raised salmon myself, so I'm.
So you don't really see too much of a difference between the two types?
Well, yeah, there is differences. Farm-raised salmon is fattier, and therefore has more taste profile, shall we say. So you have to learn some tricks of cooking the wild salmon, for instance. I use a little bit of olive oil to freshen it up, and or add a little oil profile to it.
Okay.
That seems to do the trick. But
Okay.
they're all good, and they're all good for you.
So they're all good.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm just going to turn to you next, because you're here talking about upskilling in particular. So tell us a little bit about what it is, because a lot of people have been saying to me, what is upskilling? What is the main purpose of it?
Well, it's an interesting one because, I mean, basically, we're losing some of the traditional skills that we had in being able to prepare seafood, particularly in some of the developing countries as well. And the reason why we wanted to come to Grimsby was because it is the seafood processing capital of the UK. I mean, Mike would probably know more, but it's probably about 70 to 80% of the seafood. And we struggled to find actually people that are skilled to be able to work in the seafood industry. You know, most youngsters these days, they're probably they all own a mobile phone and a laptop. They want to go into IT where they think they can make big money quickly. They don't want to go into the seafood industry where there's actually some really good careers to be had. And that's really what we're sort of looking at.
And upskilling, of course, is training people for not just seafood jobs as well. I mean, it's also looking at maybe what kind of careers they can also move on to sometimes.
Well, that's absolutely right, because there's a whole range of jobs in the sea. It's not all about just standing there with a knife filleting. I mean, there's quality control jobs. There's a whole mass of jobs that people can get involved in the seafood industry. But I think people sort of tend to think, oh, it's just handling a few bits of fish, but it's not. It's so much more than that. It's all about food technology. It's about can be about IT, computers. It can be anything these days, really.
Okay, so Mike, we're going to come to you in a moment. What we're first of all going to do is we're going to look at clip number 2 of our keynote speeches that we've been filming today. We're going to look at it just because they're talking about food contamination and how it's reflected in the media. So we'll be back in just a moment.
So, one of the most pressing challenges is ensuring that the programme is aligned with key human health risks. And one of those risks is around viral contamination, and particularly norovirus. And I talked earlier on about the kind of consumer reputation or reputation with consumers and confidence. And the one good thing that we know about food and food scares is they do make the papers. And papers do like stories that talk about sickness and illness, etc. So they can be extremely damaging to the industry, and there is a recognised need for effective controls.
So Mike, that was a clip in which we were looking at how come the relationship between the media and the seafood industry is kind of it's kind of tumultuous at times. It can be very variable. What do you make of it?
It certainly can be, and there are lots of reasons for that. One of those reasons would be that seafood, wild captured seafood, it's probably the only remaining major food source which is hunted from the wild. In most cases now, when we're talking animal proteins, they're raised on farms. Here, we're actually going out into the wild and we're finding these animals in the depths of the oceans, and we're bringing them back for the nation's plates. That means we have to balance how much food we take from nature with nature's ability to replenish that. So there is a huge sustainability debate around how much we harvest. On top of that, you have the fact that these animals are living outside for the whole of their lives, right up to the point of capture, outside of any human systems. So we can't control where they go, what they eat, what kind of chemicals they might be exposed to from the natural environment where they're living. So there is some uncertainties around seafood because it's not a controlled animal production process. I mean, it's got lots and lots of fantastic things in its favour, over and above, advantages over and above farm systems. The types of species we have, the wonderful range of flavours, and seafood, of course, is very great for cooking with. It's not a simple protein; it's complex and hugely exciting. So we have to balance some of the negative perceptions and address those.
Now, Tim, you're from a completely different media background. Of course, you're based in America. So, I mean, do you have the really big food scares, which we've certainly had with some industries in the UK?
Yes, there's a lot of food scares in the States. There hasn't been many in seafood for a while. And we have sort of an advanced preventive system, as you do here in Europe, which has eliminated a lot of those problems. But you know, in the 1980s, there was some botulism incidents and that sort of thing. So it does happen.
Thank you very much. It's interesting to see it from all of your different perspectives. So thank you very much. So thank you very much for my guests, but they won't be going anywhere, and we'll be back in a moment just after this ad break.
The World Seafood Congress 2015 is sponsored by Seafish. The World Seafood Congress 2015 is sponsored by Seafish.
Welcome back to this very special live show about the World Seafood Congress, coming to you live from the Grimsby Institute, right in the middle of Grimsby. Now, before the break, we were speaking about trade upskilling and how that's affecting the seafood industry. But one of the things I really want to get from you guys is, what are you most excited to see? We've still got one more day of the programme. Chris, I'm going to start with you.
Well, actually, I'm quite looking forward to the plenary session. The plenaries have been absolutely superb so far. And tomorrow we've got the Director of Fisheries from Norway coming across, Liv Homefjord. I'm really interested to hear what she's got to say about Norway and what they're doing in the seafood industry going forwards.
Tim, what about you?
I would echo that. Not only do we have the Director of Fisheries from Norway, but we have a famed explorer, Mr. Fines, and another woman who talks about change, and it sounds very exciting. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Indeed, we're speaking to him tonight, and we can see that on the show tomorrow. Mike, what are you most looking forward to see? You know, we've got one more day left. There must be something that's sort of taken your fancy.
Well, actually, I'm really looking forward to seeing a presentation that's going to be made by Young's very own marine biologist, a guy called David Parker, and his talk is entitled "The Marine Biology of a Fish Finger."
Oh, right.
Sounds fascinating.
Is there a lot of marine biology in fish fingers?
Oh, well, we'll find out tomorrow. It's clearly about the sustainability of the fish that goes into the fish finger.
And of course, fish fingers have remained a popular staple since they started, really.
And they're made here in Grimsby.
And they are made here in Grimsby. Now, what do you guys know about Carlos Santos?
Well, we're getting older now, but he's obviously a lot older than us. But we sort of grew up with Carlos as being one of the key guys at the FAO on developing a lot of the techniques and technology going along the seafood chain.
Now, Mike, you're from Young's, a Grimsby-based company, and of course, you know, Carlos studied here in the Grimsby Institute. What kind of difference does it make, do you think, to have someone studying kind of seafood-related things in Grimsby? It seems to produce a kind of world-class people almost.
It certainly does, and it's the Academy of Grimsby has populated the world of seafood. In my business life, I travel all over the world. Looking for new species opportunities and visiting suppliers. And almost everywhere you go, people have heard of Grimsby and have heard of the Grimsby Institute. And very often you meet people who've been educated here. It is an amazing outreach into the world of seafood.
Now, that actually is a perfect lead into the interview. I've now been told in my ear that we can now actually look at the interview with Carlos Santos, so we'll be back in just a moment.
I did veterinary medicine. I'm a doctor in veterinary medicine. And I started as a fish inspector, as training as a fish inspector. And as a fish inspector, I worked 18 years in Brazil. The British Council offered me a fellowship of 2 years to do my master in fish technology. Outposted here in Grimsby, College of Technology. That time there was 2 students first who did the master. Myself and somebody from Malaysia. So the 2 years that I spent here, I learned very, very much. As soon as I finish this course here, FAO hired me as a consultant. This is a special opportunity. And I already did something that I dreamed was yesterday. I walk into my old house that I lived here, very close to here. Eastwood Avenue, 35 Eastwood Avenue. So I'm very happy.
Now, Tim, now that we've actually managed to find the right bit of video, you've also had a relationship with Carl Santos. Everyone seems to know him, you know, in this environment.
Yes, I met him 16 years ago at a Codex Fishery Products Committee meeting, and we've known each other over the years at IAFI events and other international fora. And he is, by the way, an IAFI founding member. And yes, we've had very warm relations, and you can see he's just a warm, generous man, and everybody loves him.
Great. It's great to know that he was here and that he's, you know, trained formally in Grimsby. You know, it's very, very refreshing to hear. In another one of our interviews we grabbed today, we spoke to Stephen Hall to see how charities tackling world hunger view programs like this one.
I think the most important thing from my perspective is thinking about how the dynamics of this system of providing fish for people to eat is working. And there's two dimensions to that. There's the demand of the people in our part of the world have, and then there's the need of the people in other parts of the world. And somehow we have to reconcile and meet both demand and need. And understanding the way people are thinking about providing fish into the future, and the genuine sense that they want to do it for both demand and need is really important. And the opportunity to talk about that and elevate some of the issues that the constituency I worry about is bothered by and needs support with is a golden opportunity for me. One of the big challenges we're going to have in the next 10 or 15 years is actually providing sufficient fish to meet demand and need. And that's going to require three things. It's going to require the kind of technical innovations around aquaculture and growing fish more effectively and in a more sustainable way. It's going to require us to get more from our fisheries than we're currently getting by managing them better, and reducing the amount of waste and loss in those systems. And that's relevant for the developed world and the developing world.
Now, Tim, we've all been talking about sustainability, and that was what that clip was just there. So, obviously, in terms of combating world hunger, what are we talking about with the major challenges here?
Well, the major challenges is that the seafood industry really has a different mindset, and it's the sort of thing that we wouldn't ordinarily think about. We think about, you know, sustaining our stocks and maximizing the profits of industry and so forth, and supplying people with nutritious seafood, but you don't think about seafood in terms of world hunger. You think about it as a high-end food. And so this was pretty provocative talk, I thought. It really got me thinking, and I really appreciated Stephen's information.
Chris, your views?
Yeah, I think I mean it was a very interesting talk. I think what it perhaps didn't focus on was the fact that there's an awful lot of seafood around the world that is landed in developing countries that basically is lost because of post-harvesting losses, where it's not handled properly because they haven't got the resources to handle it, and it ends up either being trashed or going for fish meal when it could actually be feeding people.
And indeed, this was one of the big discussion points yesterday in terms of Australia, and the laws there mean that, you know, some waste food products from the seafood industry will just go to landfill. Yeah,
well, that's something that our last fisheries minister in the UK, Richard Benyon, actually suggested he didn't want happening with the new landing obligations in the UK. But I mean, but if you go around the world, so I was working in Pakistan last year, in Balochistan, which is the poorest area of Pakistan, and there was something like 70% of the seafood landed by the local fishermen gets trashed. Yeah. And they get something like 7 rupees a kilo for it. Whereas if they landed it in good quality, they could get maybe 70 rupees a kilo and enhance their living conditions and come out of poverty and get better literacy out of it as well. Mike,
your opinions on sustainability?
Yeah, I think there's two things, and that may make it sound simpler than it really is. But these things were discussed today at the conference. One is maximising the sustainable harvest of wild capture fisheries, so that the oceans can provide to human beings the maximum amount of food possible that is sustainable for the future. The second thing is developing aquaculture. And this is really where the big opportunity sits on a global scale. to freshwater aquaculture, seawater aquaculture. There's lots and lots of different types and ways that aquaculture can contribute good quality food into the human food supply chains.
Chris, what have been your highlights of the programme so far this year?
I think it's been the interaction with everybody. People have engaged, and we've got people here from literally all over the world, and they've really become active in all the discussions that have taken place at the various sessions, and that's been really quite rewarding to see that. They're not standoffish, and they really do want to get involved with the discussions.
And Mike, what have your highlights been? I mean, it's been so full of things,
absolutely,
hasn't it?
Absolutely, and I completely echo Chris's thoughts there. It's as much as the presentations, it's the networking, the fact people have come from all over the world to Grimsby to talk to us about seafood, and what's not to love about that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, all three of you, for coming and joining us today. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. That's all we've got time for on today's show, so we'll be back again tomorrow evening live at 5 here on Estuary. We're going to be speaking to Sir Ranulph Fiennes, as well as Nigel Edwards of Seafish and Sarah Barento of Swansea University. We'll also be speaking to Tom Pickerell. We'll be back tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.
The World Seafood Congress 2015 is sponsored by Seafish.